Hello, and welcome to Real Menopause Talk. My guest today is Kate Codrington. Kate is a menstrual and menopause mentor, podcaster, workshop facilitator, writer, and so much more. She is post-menopause and therefore in her second spring. We met up so I could find out more. Hi, Kate.
Let me get myself sorted.
How are you?
Present and correct. Hello. I'm very well. Yes, delighted to be here and to chat with you on this sunny day.
It is. It's beautifully sunny and warmed up a bit since this morning. I would love to know a little bit about your background, of which I believe there to be much, that has brought you to doing all the wonderful things that you do at the moment.
Oh, where to start? Back in the mists of time. I suppose, okay, so I could start with talking about the culture in my family, which was very middle class, very English, Protestant background, very kind of about doing duty. Mm-hmm. So the theme very strongly was of getting on with things. So, and that, in a sense, that kind of set the tone for my working life, because as a kind of a sensitive person, in fact, I have two sisters and we're all quite sensitive people. That involves quite a lot of effort to kind of not have any needs. So if my professional life has been anything, it has been an adventure to explore what it's like to be in a body that feels, and what it might be like to have a need, and how the hell do you then express it and then navigate all that stuff where it might get met or not. So that for me, that involved lots of wacky 80s personal growth stuff. Frankly, quite dangerous now in retrospect. And then I received touch. That was a game changer, to be touched with a good quality touch. And then I learned massage, and then I spent a long time training and working as a body psychotherapist. And that was sort of more being in a body and what that might mean, and how the body might inform us of our surroundings and our path, and how to be content in our skin, I suppose, and safe in our skin, to feel safe. And this kind of naturally took me into birth stuff. So I was lucky enough to have a child and then another one, and that was a bit of a shock. In terms of identity, in terms of what I thought about bodies, in terms of rites of passage, who the hell I thought I was and what the hell was going on. So that kind of set off a whole other exploration into what motherhood might mean professionally. And then that kind of naturally went into an interest in other things that affect female bodies, like menopause. And of course, when that arrived for me, I was like, what is this? What is this thing? Why has, how many times have you heard this? I bet everybody you interview says it. Why did nobody tell me? And this was back in the old days, before perimenopause was invented. One day, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, we will nail the point when perimenopause was invented as a contemporary topic, because it certainly didn't exist when I was 38.
It would be fascinating to know. I remember it being a word that cropped up in the playground as I dropped my oldest daughter off for school one day, and there was sort of a group of us, and she came in and she goes, "Did you know there's a thing called perimenopause and it lasts for 10 years? But that was it. That must have been about 8 years ago.
But isn't that interesting? There was a word, and it didn't sound very inviting.
No, none of it does.
You weren't bringing out the bunting on that one. Oh no, what should we do? I don't know, let's panic. And actually we've travelled a long way, because if we travel, another 8 years to the present, It is something that is a known quantity. There's still, can I swear?
Of course.
Okay, there's still a shitload of panic that comes with it. There's perimenopause! There's panic! But at least people might have an idea in the mainstream consciousness, might have an idea about what that might involve.
So when you did encounter it, what did you do?
Well, I went and asked, I made, I made a Facebook post, actually. I went, what is this? And the response was really interesting because there was a resounding silence. And people said privately, in a private message, oh, you're brave. And because I don't know, I think I'm not in the mainstream in general, I was like, why is that brave? Because I didn't get the stigma. Kind of like I came out clean, I didn't have any stigma or beliefs about it. And for me, my experience was very much bound up with postnatal stuff and motherhood. So I had kids, relatively speaking, fairly late, and I was 38 and 40. And so I was postnatal at the same time as perimenopause was arriving. And they're both states where our identity is on the move.
Yeah.
And they're both states when we're very permeable and feeling lost. Mm-hmm. So I was lost. I really, really struggled. But at the time, I didn't really know about that, I think. In any case, I was going to say duck feet. It wasn't even duck feet. I was kind of doggy paddling so hard to hold my life together, to hold it all together, that was all I could do.
Did you look for any support at any point here?
Yeah, yes, I did, because I've always rather liked my menstrual cycle. I've always really enjoyed it and really found a sort of this natural rhythm kind of really reassuring. So when, after my second child, my body sort of started to recover and my cycle came back, and it was not as I had experienced it before, I wanted to understand what that was about, because I felt off. Mm-hmm. Everything felt strange, and I felt, that sense of being lost, and which I now, from the education I received from Red School, understand to be a pretty much standard experience of perimenopause, is that we're lost because we're between states, because our identity is shifting so much. We have to spend that time, and we're going, I'm waving my arms, listeners, because that's the nature of the beast. So I went to see, I'd love to credit her, and I can't remember her name. I will give you her name later. Mm-hmm. She's a Mayan and Alvigo practitioner in Oxford. Lizzie. Oh, maybe it's Lizzie. I can't remember. Anyway, I went to see her and she kind of cued me in. So it was in a body sense and in a touch sense. So I started to massage my belly every day, and that really brought me into contact with myself.
How does that work?
Oh, wow. How does that work? Oh, my goodness. Well, okay, belly. So full of judgment and challenge for us in this culture. Mm-hmm. And yet it holds all of our feelings, all of our gut reactions, all of our kind of more unconscious, I would say, and into the pelvic bowl with holding all our creativity and whatever the hell we think feminine might mean or not mean, or love about that or reject about that. So what you're doing if you're massaging is making contact with all that stuff in a kind and loving and present way. So it's just the sweetest way of coming into contact with whoever the hell you are in the moment, just coming into the present. I can't recommend it highly enough. Even if over your clothes while you're listening to this, you just put both hands on your belly and take a breath, and then move around in a clockwise. It has to be clockwise, in a clockwise motion, a little bit. That's enough. It just makes so much difference.
How do you approach menopause from the outside? What is your philosophy? I love the fact that your book that comes out next year is called The Second Spring, and literally just been discussing the different names for Second Spring or Part 2 or even Part 3. What is your approach and your philosophy?
Well, my approach I learned from Alexandra Pope and Shani Hugo Wurlitzer at Red School. And I've worked a lot with Leora Leboff. Together, we're called Womankind. And what we use is a seasonal approach. So it's really intuitive and simple to get. I've learned a lot of theory, psychological theory in my life, and a lot of it you really have to try hard to get your head around. But this is really embodied and earthy and practical. So if you imagine your first period as being spring, so you're feeling like you want to explore and discover who you are and maybe go out into the world and fall on your face and come back. So you're broadly protected, but you're finding out who you are. And that's the sort of spring thing. Then you would come into your summer years, which would be kind of 30-ish, that decade, the decade of your 30s. And that's much more about manifesting who you are in the world. So it might be, the thing where your career becomes blindingly important and everything is, I have to make it. See that pinnacle of, the hierarchy, and I want to be at the top of the ladder, and you bang your head on the glass ceiling, or you might want to have children, or you might be really involved in social justice and wanting to see the changes. This has to happen, We get really driven. And even if we are prevented from action, as many of us are, by societal stuff or financial stuff or physical stuff or mental whatever, you will feel the frustration and the pain of not being able to. So spring and summer are sort of coming out into the world, an outward flow. And then you would come into perimenopause years, and that's autumnal. So this is a place where you're going inward, where, we're recording this in November. The leaf color is beautiful, and we're lucky it's a sunny day. Mm-hmm. But the energy of the trees is to come inwards. You can see the true colors of the leaves. The energy comes inwards and towards the earth. So in autumn and perimenopause, we often we see the truth, and we have no energy for fiddling around out there. No, no is our favorite word. And that moves into the winter of menopause, which is where you have much more emphasis on rest and acceptance. And this is where the real healing can happen, not because our problems and our challenges go away, but much more that we become more friendly with them, more able to address. So, for example, if you're, say, flushing, then it would be, in autumn, it might be, oh, I'm so hot and I have this horrible thing and it's ridiculous and I'm so angry and every time I have a cake and a glass of wine, it gets so often. By the winter, you might be saying, well, this is interesting. Shall I have that slice of cake and a glass of wine? Or shall I not? Or I wonder what's making me want to eat the cake and a glass of wine. So it becomes a bit more, it's a little bit calmer and a little bit more investigative into why are we behaving in this way and what would serve us. And sometimes we drink the wine and eat the cake, or eat a whole cake and a whole bottle of wine, and sometimes we don't. On one level, that doesn't really matter. It's much more about the quality of relationship that we have with ourselves in this kind of quieter, slower time. And that leads into a second spring, hence the title of the book, that there is another spring where we come out of this quieter time and back out into the world and back into another cycle, a whole second cycle. So in our culture, menopause is like the panic, the perimenopause panic is seen as the end. That's it. Okay, that's it. Curtain's over. Thank you very much. Now, bye. What am I going to do for 30 years? What kind of bullshit is this? It's just insane. But there is a whole new cycle where if you can be sweet enough with yourself, then you will have the energy in second spring to be out investigating again and falling on your face and saying, well, hey, that relationship didn't work and that job just stank. So who can I be now? And what would this be like? And that inevitably involves the sort of things that we used to do as teenager, like falling on our face and going home crying, getting back under the blanket. Oh, it's too bright. It hurts my eyes. But that is then followed by a second summer as well. So a second summer of wanting to manifest out in the world. And you can see if you look at your older friends, that those who have been able, and it is a privilege to some extent, there is a privilege, if you are crushed by financial worries, it's really hard to get the time to rest, but it's not impossible. But in your second summer, a lot of people are going off having unsuitable sex and learning to throw pots and painting and singing because they want to, and whatever the hell, just trying stuff out for the hell of it and having fun, before we then get into a second autumn, which is more reflective, and a second winter where we're preparing for death to leave as well.
How would you help women transition through the slightly flappy, crazy frustration of perimenopause and settle into menopause?
I think a lot of it is about knowing that it's normal, that it's part of the process. Leora at Womankind and I, we often use the phrase, if it's messy, it's working, or if it's meant to be messy. We have this feeling that if it doesn't look like an Instagram post, then we're doing it wrong and we've failed somehow. Mm-hmm. But if you think about it, we've spent, I'm not very good at sums, but from our teenage years all the way through to our late 30s, early 40s, getting more and more armoured and more determined. And, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do this living thing, I'm going to do it and do it. We have to then soften in order to make it through to the other cycle. So feeling that everything is messy and you're all tight and you're really trying to push through and holding everything together, because God knows there's masses of stuff to hold. And this feeling, and then you add on the judgment that you're failing and that you feel ashamed that you've reached early 40s. The shame is just so poisonous. It's so toxic. Just knowing that this messiness and this difficulty and the shame is part of the package and is universal. It's just like, it's such a relief. And that will settle the nervous system. And that can only really happen if you find communities where people are honest and real about their experiences. It's about accepting, I'm not alone here, and connecting with people.
I think that is one of the most valuable things in life, never mind just in perimenopause, menopause, to have particularly really good female connections, because we are all then in it together. We'll understand each other and each other's experiences, even if they're different from one another, just to connect and understand and appreciate and support.
So that's the kind of first thing. And then there's stuff like resting, and everybody goes, I can't rest. That's the kind of automated response. Maybe we can't rest. And I think that people have a particular idea about what that might look like. That has to mean lying down on the sofa. Mm-hmm. But actually resting can be it can be many shades, many colors. So it might be not gripping so tightly with your mind, or leaving more mess in your house, or delegating more, or saying no more, or taking a breath, or going, sticking your nose outside the window, or staring at a tree. And the more rest you can find for yourself, the easier things will be. I do believe that a lot of the challenges that we experience in perimenopause are to do with the toxicity that we have around us. So a lot of it we can't do stuff about, like the air quality and the water quality. But it also has to do a lot with the toxicity that comes through plastics that we then take into ourselves, and the food that we eat and stuff. So there's a lot you can do around that. I mean, there's heaps you can do around that. I see it very often that we think, right, okay, no, so I'm picking my pen, I've got my menopause list, and I'm going to grow some sprouts, rest once a day, and I'm going to, you get this kind of list of improvements to make in your life, and it becomes another stick to beat ourselves with. You can only really implement those sorts of changes in your life if you start to go slower and accept, hang out with people who accept what's going on with you.
So creating boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the boundaries just come. But you don't have to create them. They're like, no! There's the boundary right there, The boundary is aching to be unleashed. That's all the shouting and the swearing and the rage and the things that we think we shouldn't be feeling. And very often they're absolutely legitimate. If you've been doing all the emotional labor in your relationship for 30 years, what do you know? There's going to be a boundary that comes up and says, no, I'm not doing that anymore.
So it's the permission and the ability to say no, finally.
Yeah. Superpower, saying no.
Is there a commonality between a majority of women who come to you for support?
I think the sense of being lost. And what else? Yeah, and I see people in all sorts of different situations, different countries, different, income brackets, different cultures, all kinds of things. But that sense of being adrift, I think, is the most common thing. People say, I don't know who I am anymore. And on one level, obviously, that frightens us because we don't expect it. If we knew to expect it, I think it would be entirely different. But in a way, it's really handy because if as I perceive, menopause is an opportunity, it's a call for our psyche to change. It's a shift. It changes us, often in dramatic ways. And if that is true, if menopause is a call for a big change, then not knowing who you are is necessarily part of that process. I see a lot of that. And I seek to reassure people. I talk about seasons and the changing and the leaves and then people are like, oh, yeah. And that automatically calms everything and grounds us and soothes our nervous system. So we're not so damn stressed stress just messes everything up. Why don't you de-stress? Because I can't! Do you think I would have thought of that already?
Yeah, finding the tools to de-stress.
And also another thing we miss is that it's usually the thing closest to us and most obvious that we can use to make change. So you feel a pain, okay, let's say joint pain. In our culture, our typical impulse is to outsource it. So immediately we're Googling. Then we go and look at professionals and blogs. And, this is getting further and further away. And so-and-so wrote an article about the relationship between joint pain and dropping estrogen and progesterone. Blah, blah, blah. And then it becomes really theoretical. And then it's going further away. And then you go and you make a phone call to have a free consult with a nutritionist, or you talk to it's getting further and further and further away, when actually maybe resting would be better. Bring it right back in. Maybe doing a breath practice would be really helpful and could completely transform your experience. Maybe spending 8 hours a week in the car is not helping the pain in your hips. Or maybe saying no to your partner about something, or your boss. But these are things that are right under our nose. But it's much easier to outsource and look at the recommendation for a fancy, and I do this all the time. I'm the worst person at this. It's much easier to look at a fancy nutritional supplement from Chile that gets flown in by aeroplane that actually stop the behavior that I do every day. And it's the changes that we can integrate in our life, like putting flax seeds on your porridge every morning, that are going to make so much more difference and are so much more sustainable for us and the planet than buying in fancy stuff and going to consult 1,000 specialists.
Start local, do the small things, try them at least, see if it works. Yeah.
And it needs tracking as well. If you rest for 10 minutes a day doing something that is restful for your mind and body, that may not be lying down, and you, cut out a bit of sugar and then things are still raging and challenging for you, then sure, then do the next step. But do that work first, because that's the work that is much harder.
What would be your starting point for somebody who has recognised that they are in perimenopause and they don't know which direction to go in?
I would encourage them to make a list of the top 3 things that really piss them off. So it might be they carry the whole domestic load in their relationship, that their child opens things but never closes them. I'm not saying this is my life. It is. Takes the lid off but doesn't close it. Opens the cupboard, doesn't close it. That was number 2. And number 3, I don't know, a work thing. Address those things. Start to shift. Those feelings need to be expressed, hopefully fairly safely, often messily. That's fine too. And that's where you start. Because if you go and ask the experts and the menopause gurus, we will all tell you from our own lens that actually you know what you need to do. It's just that you don't want to do it. It's just that it's really hard. That is the really growthful place.
Recognizing things that you've put off or squashed and dealing with them seems to be a recurring theme. And actually, it's a really positive side of this phase because you have to deal with it and then you're freer.
Well, try not dealing with it. That's the alternative. No, don't do anything about that. Keep on doing, carrying the domestic load and putting the toothpaste top back on and closing the cupboard and see where that gets you. In my crystal ball, I wonder if this will lead to peace and happiness. Many, many people, their relationships end in their 40s. That isn't necessarily what's going to happen for you, but it's a really good time because we have these supercharged boundaries and this discernment and the voice that comes through to say, this isn't working for me. Something needs to change here. The other big thing that I would really, if I had one of my fairy wishes, I think one of them would be for the mainstream understanding to be that perimenopause and menopause is a time of sensitivity. And that's something that everybody can understand because we all experience it. Once you understand that this time will just be more sensitive, and if your friend said to you, I'm feeling really sensitive now, what would you do? You talk in a quieter voice. You'd do something soothing and calming. You probably not give her something, well, maybe you give her a chili, I don't know. But, you would do those sorts of things. And once your boss, your partner, your child understands that, I'm feeling this sensitivity, it's a brilliant key into, oh, well, maybe you need this. And then you say, yes, and it might go on for 10 years. Oh.
Compassion, then, to one another.
Yeah, self-compassion,
well.
Absolutely, yeah. And that shows up in different ways for different people. I mean, a lovely practice is to withdraw a bit into yourself and figure out, well, how can I be really kind to myself right now? What would that mean? And that's something that we can all regularly hook into. The moment-to-moment stuff, which makes a difference.
All wonderful advice. Is there any one final thing that you would like to add?
1?
10? As many as you like.
If I were to speak to, or if there are people listening now who are, really, really struggling in perimenopause with emotional and psychological stuff, is that second spring is just bloody fantastic. I feel clearer. Menopause unleashed a kind of vibrant creativity that I haven't had access to since I was a kid. My relationship is better. I give less fucks and I have a lot more fun. I think there's something about the process of the combination of kindness and really utilizing those boundaries, actually, really giving yourself permission to utilize the boundaries to keep out, to stop what you don't need in your life, what is damaging you in your life, so that you can have time to be kind to yourself. And that combination of implementing those boundaries and nourishing that kindness together, it's an ongoing practice. I'm constantly falling over and getting into the most horrible pickle and doing too much and saying yes when I mean no. But I just see so much more ease around things now than I did certainly in my 30s and 40s.
So something to look
God, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. It has been such a pleasure to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Kate's first book, Second Spring, comes out on the 17th of February 2022 and is published by Harper Collins. Details on how to find Kate and her book are in the show notes. Head to realmenopausetalk.com to find out more and hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.